This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201. Welcome to Nicholas Hood III Ministries, a ministry of hope, spiritual inspiration, personal power guided by Christian love. May the power of God's Holy Spirit fall upon you as you sit back and enjoy today's program. I introduce you now to Pastor Nicholas Hood III.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm Nick Hood, pastor of the Plymouth United Church of Christ, located in the very heart of Detroit, very tip-top, the medical center area of Detroit. And I'm just loving this ministry so much. And today we're talking about being lukewarm in your faith. And not just being lukewarm, but what I call an accommodationist. In a minute, I'll tell you what I mean by being an accommodationist. But I have two wonderful people with me today, a husband and wife who are young and also ministers. We have the Reverend Candace and the Reverend David Nunn Telford. And good morning to the two of you.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
And folks, I want you to stick around, and we'll be right back. And when we come back, we're going to start with Reverend David Telford, Nunn Telford, talking about what does it mean to be lukewarm in your faith.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's ministries. You'll never be the same.
Thanks again for joining us today. I want to talk about what does it mean to be lukewarm in your faith. If you look at the book of Revelation, which is where God gives a prophecy and words to 7 churches. But the last of those churches is a church called Laodicea. And it's like the Lord saves the most harsh words for that last church. He says, I wish that you were either hot or cold, but because you're neither hot nor cold. I know your faith, but sometimes you're with me, sometimes you're not with me. And I just wish that you would take a stand, and I would like that better. And I really think that this prophecy, folks, during the 4th chapter of Revelation is really an extension of what we hear from Jesus all throughout his ministry. But in particular, today I want to look at Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus tells his listeners, let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. And sometimes people, I found, just try to have it both ways. They want to be a Democrat, but they also want to be a Republican. I know some people, who tell me, they say, I'm a Christian to everybody. If you're Pentecostal, I'm with you. If you're UCC, AME, Church of God in Christ, I'm with you. Whatever you are, I am. And I just think at some point, it's essential that the Lord wants us to just make a stand. And the reason why I use this word accommodationist is it's one thing to be lukewarm in your faith. And one of the things I pray on for myself is I don't want to be an accommodationist. And what I mean by that is that sometimes I look for excuses to explain other people's behavior when I don't think I really need to do that. I probably don't need to do that. But sometimes I feel like I'm accommodating others because I want to forgive them. I'm accommodating others because I want to explain why a person has reneged on a promise, reneged on a commitment. An accommodationist when somebody simply has been fearful and they didn't want to go all the way. And so today I want to talk about this business of being lukewarm in your faith and how, as ministers, the three of us are ministers, how do we minister to people who are lukewarm in faith? How do we minister to ourselves if we feel like we are vacillating? And if a person is, I'm saying a lot now, but I'm just trying to set the stage for you. If a person is vacillating in their faith, if they are vacillating in their commitment to Jesus Christ, if they're vacillating regarding standing up for equality and justice, peace and love and harmony, if a person is guilty of vacillating in their faith, at what point do we accommodate them to give them room to vacillate? And at what point do we hold fast and tell a person, no, you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision sooner rather than later. And I've said a lot, but Reverend David, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think we have a great foundation for what I hope will be a great conversation. I think one place I would invite us to start, I really love the gospel, so I'm gonna, focus a little bit more on Matthew. And when I think about why the author of Matthew wrote the gospel, is because the people of biblical Israel are struggling. The Jewish people of that time are living in the wake of their temple being destroyed, and they're trying to make sense of a lot of things. And part of what Matthew is trying to do in this text is really try to establish Jesus as being the fulfillment of Judaic prophecies and laws and all of those things. And so this specific portion of the text, right? Let your yes be yes and your no mean no. That's really coming out of what's known as the Sermon on the Mount, right? And like you said, it's an extension of what Jesus has kind of talked about throughout all of the Gospels. But this particular moment, Jesus is being followed around by a lot of crowds, And at least in Matthew, Jesus climbs this mountain and he's talking to his disciples, but the crowd who has followed him is kind of eavesdropping. And Jesus drops this gem in the middle of his sermon. Let your yes be yes, let your no be no. But he's doing it in a moment where he's talking about oaths. And what Matthew would do over and over is talk about how Jesus would say like this phrase, you have heard it said, but I say unto you, right? Jesus is kind of like reinterpreting like the Judaic law for the people who are listening. And back in the day in ancient Israel, oaths were really, really important. They were covenants. They were almost like contractual covenants that people would take. But there was a huge emphasis on these oaths as they related just to God. But Jesus was trying to get people to understand what the context of oaths meant as it related to people and to the community. What does it mean to make promises and oaths to the people that you're living with, having both spiritual implications, but also communal implications as well. And so I think that when Jesus is talking to a people who are living in the context of empire, Matthew is writing to a people who are living in the midst of tragedy themselves after seeing things have been destroyed around them. And they themselves have to rely on each other as a community to come up out of that. It's really important for them to grapple with this idea of your words having power and your commitments having power and meaning. That when you promise to do something or to say something or to show up, like that has import, right? And you ask this question, right? Like, what does it mean for us to be members of communities ourselves and even clergy? How we deal with that? I think that there has to be there has to be something that we say when words are spoken and promises are not kept. What does it mean for us to hold people accountable? What does it mean for us to hold communities accountable? What does it mean for us to hold our cities and our nation and our politicians accountable? Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. I think that Jesus is wrestling with a lot of those ideas and trying to get people to understand that our commitments to God and our commitment to people matter. And we shouldn't just kind of throw promises out there without being able to follow them up.
Very well spoken. Reverend Candace, what would you add to that?
I would say that a commitment to communities, people, and even to yourself may look a little different than someone's faith journey. I think, if anything, the communities and people that we're connected to should have an immense amount of grace and patience with us as we navigate what faith and a personal relationship will look like. And so I think it's less about making a determinant on a person and their faith journey on what it looks like, and more trying to accompany them continuous engagement and encouragement for a sustained practice, a sustained faith journey, and not writing them off. I do think that there's something about commitment, but I think that the intimacy of a faith journey is long, and that it's going to have some highs, it's going to have some lows, and I think it's important to allow people to navigate what that looks like. Maturity doesn't come without those peaks and valleys, and so I think more than anything, when we're talking about the faith journey, it's okay whatever it looks like. You can just stay on the course. And I think that if there's something that a religious community should do, is to provide encouragement and companionship on that journey, and less about determining if that person's faith is lukewarm or this or that. Let that be dealt with them and God, but just stay apart and be a companion with them throughout that process.
Reverend Candace, well spoken, and I want to come back to you on that, but we need to take a break right now. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm with the Reverend Candace and the Reverend David Nunn Telford, and we're talking about commitment in faith and whether or not you're lukewarm. Stick around, and we'll be right back.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
Again, welcome to Nick Hood Ministries, and I'm with the Reverend Candace, the Reverend David Nunn Telford today, and we're talking about commitment in faith, swearing on an oath, letting your yes mean yes, your no mean no. These are part of the words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. And Reverend Candace, right before the break, you were expounding on this. Do you want to add a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that even Jesus had moments where Jesus was like, okay, is this really how it's supposed to go? Is this really going to happen? Especially when we're getting closer to the crucifixion in the Garden of Gethsemane. So I think for me, it's more so about allowing people to go through whatever faith journey that they are going to have to navigate. And I think if anything, we should love one another and be companions on that journey, and just be there for them. Nobody wants to feel like they're going through anything alone. And I think that strong churches, strong religious communities are ones that accompany one another, whatever life is throwing at people. Yeah.
I think that you're absolutely right about that, because I think about moments all throughout the Bible, but especially in, and across the Gospels, where people made promises and broke them, and I think that we have to ask ourselves the question: if Jesus the carpenter is our model, how did Jesus react in those moments? Right? I think of Thomas, who is forever labeled. I mean, like, Thomas has like the worst nickname in the history of nicknames, right? Like Doubting Thomas, right? Or Peter, who denies Jesus. Like, how does Jesus react in those moments? Jesus doesn't forever condemn those folks to their mistakes or to their breaking of those promises. Jesus gives them a way back in, and a way for hope, and a way for redemption. And I think that what's nuanced about this conversation is, I do think that when we talk about systems, when we talk about cities and nations and promises that are made and commitments that should be made to entire communities, there is something to be said about holding folks accountable to make sure that the most vulnerable among us get what they need. But I think that if we're talking about kind of like the interpersonal, communal, spiritual level, I think you're absolutely right that God doesn't abandon us when we mess up, or when we make a promise and kind of mess up. And so it's important for us to have that grace. I can't tell you how many times when I was a kid, I went up for that altar call because I had messed up and I needed to come back to God time and time again. And I felt like God didn't abandon me.
I want to share a story with the two of you. This verse of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount, when he says, let your yes mean yes, your no mean no. I don't know if I shared with the two of you, but I'm in my 47th year of ordained ministry. 37th year as pastor. But tucked in the middle of that pastoral experience, I was an elected member of the Detroit City Council, citywide, for 8 years. And that was, for me, one of the most spiritual times of my life. And I'm going to tell you why. One, running for office and going door to door. For those of you looking at this from Detroit, if you know where Mount Elliott and Pulford Street are, I was going west on Pulford from Mount Elliott and going door to door. My dad was on a block over from me. My Sunday school teacher, James Watts, was on the opposite. And the three of us were just going door to door. And, you know, Detroit was back then was getting, experiencing more vacancies. And so there were a lot of vacant houses on this street where I was campaigning. But I went up to one house where there was a group of men. Many of them were dressed in dark suits. They looked like they had been to a funeral. They were sitting out on, chairs, tree stumps, whatever, drinking. And I asked myself very quickly, should I go talk to these guys? Is it even worth my time to do this? And I decided that I would go talk to them because I said, if I don't talk to them, they'll talk about me behind my back. So I go to talk to him, and this one man he came to me, and he said, young man, you're running for office? I said, yes, sir. He said, I just want one thing. You know, he said, I want to know one thing. He said, if I vote for you, can you take away my erectile dysfunction? Now, he didn't say it like that. You know, he said, can you make my And, you know, I'm a young guy, and I'm sure I smiled when the guy said that. And I'm saying to myself, thinking to myself, what in the world have I gotten myself into?
Right.
And before I could answer the guy, another guy came up from that group, and he chastised the first man. He said, man, you shouldn't talk to that young man like that. And then he looked at me, and he said, young man, I only want one thing out of an elected official. I said, what's that? He said, all I want is for your yes to mean yes and your no to mean no. He said, if you can do that much, I will be very pleased with you. He said, and I'll vote for you. And I committed to him that day on Pulford Street that my yes would mean yes, my no would mean no. Then when I get elected to the city council, every formal session of the council, which is where you take the formal votes, you might have hundreds of items that are voted on. For me, it was a spiritual experience because, one, I'm asking myself, what would God have me to do here? Two, what is consistent with my politics in all this? And so, in the most ironic of ways, being in the seat of justice in Detroit actually took me to a deeper level spiritually, because a politician can waffle as long as they want until it's time to vote. And when on the day that you vote, and it doesn't matter if it's Detroit, New York, Greenville, Mississippi, or wherever, New Orleans, when you're ready to vote, whether or not you're a legislator on a council, if you're a state legislator, state senator, United States senator, congressperson, at some point you have to vote. And when you make a vote, your yes is either yes or your no is no. And the words that guy gave me on Pulford Street have never left me. That is very, very important to know what you believe in and then stand up for what you believe in. So I'm just curious, from the two of you, going back to you, Reverend David, any other thoughts that you have about this portion of the Sermon on the Mount?
Yeah, I think that the story that you just told and kind of the impact that it had really speaks to the importance of knowing kind of what ground you're rooted in, right? And it really being so important for us to have a foundation of ethics and morals by which we live, because that's your North Star, right? Like that's how your yes is yes and your no is no, because there are so many temptations, I think, out there for us to, in an effort to help the communities that we're in or try to be good to the people, we may try to be politically savvy. I'm sure that there were temptations perhaps to try to align with certain groups, but I think that when you have a groundedness and a foundation of knowing what's good and what's right in the world, it allows the way in which you move, the promises that you make, and keeping those promises, it makes it much easier to make those decisions, even though like the blowback may be difficult, right? Maybe even if there are consequences, if you're grounded and you know your foundation, it's much easier to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. And Reverend Candace, just any closing thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that we all have to take stock of who we're accountable to and how the decisions we make will impact other people. And I think that there is various levels of impact, and I think that depending on who you're connected to and your level of impact, always considering those who you'll impact should be a North Star and should help you make those type of decisions.
Well, I want to thank the two of you for joining me this week and last week, and I hope it's not the last time. I hope you'll come back to Detroit and be a part of this, but we have to wrap this up now. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I can't tell you how much it warms my heart just to know that you have been watching this program, and I hope that you'll plan to look at the program next week. I hope you'll call your friends, tell them that 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, they can see this on the Word Network. Also, we're building an app where you can look at it on the app, but even before then, if you can see all of these videos that I'm doing on the actually on YouTube under my name, Reverend Nicholas Hood. But until next week, God bless you, God keep you, and remember, I'm praying for you.